question is, I'm going to be very practical here. In the last census, the data from the last census said at that time, more than 60% of the individuals who were Americans, I'm not saying immigrants or people who got a green card, but who were born in the United States, were not white. And the projections from demographers is that that number will only grow. So at the same time, this past week, as we're doing this interview, it's a Friday, I read in higher ed trade publications, 4 colleges closed this past week. And the anticipation that if a college has less than 1,000 students, it'll be gone in the next 10 years. If you are structured in a traditional way, how are you reaching out? Because, the last census was what, 5-6 years ago? Those students, our culture, regardless of your ethnicity, tells you that the one main stepping stone to middle class is a college education. If you're not appealing to those students of color, how are you expecting to survive? And if they are the majority of the population, of the young population, they are our future. I don't give a damn what color you are. That is America. That is the future of America. Do you not, for your own survival as an institution, try to appeal, make yourself attractive to those students?
That's the interest convergence that Josie was talking about before, though. You go so far as to get your census up, to get your enrollment personnel and your census up. But that doesn't mean that you dig deep and really look at why people succeed or fail. And if you continue expecting students to assimilate to a predominantly white institution, then we're really not going to be benefiting from the diversity that we have on campus. So I feel like
that's saying we have a huge dropout rate. So if you're, and most of the dropout rate comes from students of color. So if you're not doing anything, and I will throw the caveat, I'm going to be very capitalistic here. It's the alum who graduate who give us money. If I don't graduate, you failed me. Why would I want to give you money? And the donors, and God bless them, who give us the $multi-million, they aren't the bread and butter foundational support of an institution. It's the alum who write the more realistic checks that are the foundational support of an institution.
Right. That's exactly academic capitalism. That's exactly what we would like to stand outside of in academia, and not to say that we're better than capitalism, but to say that capitalism is the wrong model for education. It's what we've been using. And I think, honestly, I don't know. I'm not a business person, but I cannot help but believe that if we have societal goals rather than capitalist goals, instead of monetary goals where, as I said earlier, people achieve their optimal development, people achieve what they're capable of.
They can self-actualize, if you want to use that term.
Self-actualize, or, that's another white guy concept, though. It's like, be outside of even what we're thinking right now. I guess what frustrates me is it's almost as if we don't have the language for understanding what a society could look like if we were actually benefiting from the diversity that we have. And to listen and to really be willing to restructure things around what students actually need. We know that students don't have a strong sense of belonging when they come here. They hit a giant university and they hit a bunch of barriers, and no one's there to really pick them up.
Yep.
And
they have a history, of poor academic preparation, not because of deficits they have, but because of a system that didn't see their assets and that also operates under that
cultural
capitalism.
mismatch that one of your colleague, co-authors.
Yeah, it doesn't just happen in higher ed. This is something that happens from the moment that child steps into a preschool, I would argue.
How do you, as educators, then? There may be lazy educators out there, but I haven't met, and I'll use that, I'm using it politely, I haven't met an educator when they start out who really doesn't want to have an impact on the people who come into their classroom. But how do you take that next step and to confront that the system that brought you up to this point is actually quite exclusive and quite off-putting, and it's not recognizing the needs of everybody who could also come to that point. And you as an educator, in the CSU, our faculty care. They really do care. It's not like they're here for the money. Let's give me a break. That's not the reason why they're here. They're here because they want to make a difference in our students' lives. But now you're asking them to take a look at themselves and the system that brought them up, that they benefited from.
But here's the thing that's interesting, though, is I've had some of these conversations, and I agree with you. I think for the most part, there's very, very few educators that come into this saying, I'm just doing it for the money.
Yeah.
Right? Or the status. But what does it mean to actually help students achieve their goals, right? Yeah. And that's the issue. It still comes back to trying to get them a good job. And I've had this conversation with faculty in different departments, folks in the College of Science and Math, and folks even in the College of Social and Behavioral, where we're from, where we still kind of look at academia, again, as a way to prepare you to be a good worker. We're not developing your wisdom. And so I think that's where I think Carrie's kind of right, that we, in doing this work, also have to recognize that we're working towards a future that no one has envisioned yet. And so there isn't a language yet. We're in the process of reconstructing what we're deconstructing and then trying to put it into practice at the same time.
So you're asking us to think about the society that Gene Roddenberry created in Star Trek, where you don't work for money.
Yeah. Bill, because by that time, they had gone through horrible things, including a Third World War in that series, right?
Yeah, exactly. But they're not working for money. They're working for the greater good. And you're in your, and I know it's also
and self-development.
And you're doing the job that you feel best suited for to serve the society. And okay, now the Republicans are going to be after us for socialism and communist ideas. Again,
I'm a fan of Star Trek and science fiction. I think they're good windows into like human morality and you know, the stories that we tell. And it's interesting that in that series, they have their ranks, so it's still kind of a hierarchical system of sorts, but they all engage in multiple hobbies, right? Like they play musical instruments, they paint, they do exercise, because they're not toiling 8 to 16 hours a day working for someone else's benefit. I kind of also want to return to an earlier question, and maybe we can edit this in a way that'll get off seem seamless. But you had asked the question of, I guess in a way, like, wouldn't we want to invest in students despite the demographic changes that are coming? Because technically that's going to be your society, whether you want to admit it or not. And it reminded me of what the Republicans tried to do right after, Barack Obama won, I think like the second time, and they did this autopsy, and they're like, we got to bring more minorities into our party, and we got to stop talking about them in such a negative way. And then Trump comes by, and they're like, nope, we're going to throw all of that out the window. We're going to go with racism because this is what we're comfortable doing, even though in the long term it's not going to benefit even the MAGA supporters. If anything, it's tragic, like how you can literally see examples of how this devotion to whiteness kills white people. That in the most conservative states in the country, you saw the highest deaths due to COVID.
Yeah.
That in those red states, you see the poorest education, but also the biggest levels of bigotry.
And the highest level of maternity deaths and
Yes.
infant deaths.
Yes.
And the highest level of health issues.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's that psychological wage of whiteness. Like, I may not be at that top, right? But at least I'm not Black. At least I'm not Latino. At least I'm not insert minority group. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It to me, this is where I get a little cynical. I often wonder if those in power would rather let the whole system burn than to actually uplift everybody, including themselves.
That's a good question. It's
Well, you
almost
asked it.
I know.
You asked great questions.
But it's like you cut your nose to spite your face.
Yeah. It again, not to be dark, it's like a little Jonestown kind of act. Everybody's coming in, it's over, so we're gonna like kill ourselves, and if you don't want to kill yourself, I'm gonna kill you.
It's white rage. I said it. It sounds like white rage, and we don't talk about it. I have a question though, because you have the gift, but you guys have actually, and it's not just the two of you, have been doing this research, and you have got your colleagues on this campus to start looking in the mirror and doing some self-examination. What is that like? That's got to be hard, because unless you're willing to ask that hard question, or it's not my field of expertise, I'm not a researcher, this isn't the topic. Carrie knows me very well, but I'm an aberration. Most people don't stop when they see the accident on the freeway. They assume somebody else is taking care of it. Most people don't have I don't want to say cultural experiences, life experiences, because then it puts my experiences into an ethnic category. They don't have life experiences that force them to confront these questions. These are hard questions, and most people just want to go through life. I want to put food on the table. I want to go see my kid's Little League game. I want my kid to go to high school and graduate. But they don't ask the hard questions of, when you ask most parents, I want my kid to grow up to be a doctor. I want my kid to grow up to be an engineer or whatever, a lawyer. They don't say, I want my kid to grow up to be happy. I don't want my kid to grow up to be a contributing, recognize their responsibility be to contributing members to society. They say, I want them to take careers that make it possible for them to buy a house. To sit back as an individual, to recognize that the trajectory I'm putting my students on may not make them happy, may not make them comfortable with who they are and their life experiences. That's hard. How do you get someone to do that?
You have to prepare people. There's a term, racial socialization, where you have to prepare people for racism, and came from Black families preparing their children. Put your hands on the dashboard when the police officer stops you, and
don't take that grape from the grocery stand and all that.
Don't take a grape, because
little things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. But oh man, can you say your state?
I'm curious to know how you came from the Midwest. Mm-hmm. How did you come to term with the realization that the system that brought you here was not inclusive or embracing of everyone?
Well, I mean, in my childhood, I had experiences during the Detroit riots of watching tanks go down my grandmother's street, of watching a fight between a Black and a white woman, and my grandmother saying, there are structural reasons why this fighting is going on. There's unfairness. And those experiences, even though I grew up in a pretty conservative family, set a fire in me very early on. And I came to CSUN. I'll tell you a little story. When my first week here, a colleague from my department came up to me and said, I feel sorry for you that you took this job. And I thought, wow, what a thing to say to somebody who just took a job. And he said, We used to have white students from Encino here, and they were so good. And since I came here, our student quality has gone down tremendously. And I hadn't taught yet, and I sat there and I thought, wow, I can't stand it that guy said that to me, and I'm going to prove him wrong. But man, that just made me think, where did I come? And then I got in the classroom, Carmen, and my whole world changed, because I'm an open person, and those early experiences influenced me to be open to the experiences of others. And once I saw the brilliance of our students, because I require a lot from them, and you ask any of my students, they will say, she made me write theory essays that synthesized empirical and theory and all of that. And I thought, well, I wonder what happens if I challenge students. And they were incredible. And over 100 of my students have PhDs now, because I saw their challenge. I saw what they had, and many of my colleagues didn't. Many of my colleagues who would say, I'm not racist, would say, the quality of our students have gone down. They no longer assimilate to what I want. They don't come to me. And I have had grants since 1992 on this campus that look at race, that look at ways that we can reach out to students. And again, I think the real key is to letting people do what they do best, to optimize their own development, for them to have the capacity to realize what they do best, and not to say, oh, wait, you need this to be your best, or you need that. Of course you need statistics. Of course you need the basics. You need the basic knowledge. But I think what our mentors, a lot of people on this campus, I'm very optimistic. A lot of the people who've participated in our training, faculty, staff, administrators, they want what's best for our students as well. And I think what we have to do is free ourselves from the idea that there's only one way to do it, that there's only straight A's and didactic education that requires tests and papers. And, there's lots and lots of ways to measure what we want to get out of students. And I think we need to challenge things like the graduate record exam, which has already been challenged at many institutions as the gold standard for getting into a doctoral program. But I think mentors on our campus and a lot of places, of course, there's a lot of variety, but there's a great deal of interest in knowing the history and really looking at identifying new ways of being. And in our articles, we talk about liberation psychology and the process of not just being aware. Of course, you know the history, you know the structures, you know the systems, deconstruction, which we've talked about before. But what we ask people to do is learn about racism. Don't, be less race disconscious, which is a lifelong process, by the way. It's not like there's a magic bullet you can swallow. To really look at yourself, because if you don't look at yourself, what we ask people to do is become aware, read this book, and then go revise your syllabus without ever looking at yourself and saying, I'm going to revise my syllabus and start teaching new things. But I don't really internalize those things yet, because I haven't really become critical of my own race history. So how are we going to move forward if we don't look at ourselves first? And I feel like mentoring is what we came here for. I agree with you, Carmen. I think most people came here not for the money or the prestige. We came here to be teachers and to be mentors. And so I believe there's a huge appetite and energy for it. There's not much time. And I'll say that when we have a grant, we can pay people a little bit. We can put it as part of their workload. But I think there's very few incentives to participate in this work. And we're busy. People are busy. Staff, administrators, faculty, we're all very busy. And so to participate in this work, there has to be value in it. And the university as a whole has to say, we'll give you time. We'll give you a stipend. We'll give you childcare if you participate in this. And to acknowledge, again, cultural taxation and what that really means for our faculty and what the workload is. We've talked about workload before. So all of these factors play a role in whether or not we support anti-racist mentoring on our campus or anywhere. We've got to make it possible. We've got to make it tangible. And I think that through large grants like Build Poder, we have made that possible.
What does anti-racist mentoring or self-examination look like?
Well, I think it looks, well, maybe I'll hand that to Josie since he wrote the first.
Yeah, well, that's in essence the idea of the anti-racist educator's journey. It's a lifelong endeavor, like Carrie alluded to. It's not like you take a few workshops and you become anti-racist and we're going to send you a certificate in the mail. Right? It doesn't work that way. It's something that becomes your lifestyle. And because of racism's capacity to mutate, to take on multiple layers, you always have to be vigilant. And that's why this is kind of a lifelong process. But like with any process, there has to be some kind of beginning of sorts. And what we do in the anti-racist educator's journey is kind of use a storytelling template that, believe it or not, comes out of the humanities, out of the originally the work of Joseph Campbell, but ended up being taken on by Vogler, who's really more in film and cinematography and those things. And the hero's journey that Campbell talked about, there are many variants of it, but in essence, it's a storytelling template that seems to appear in many, many different types of stories across different cultures, even stories that may not seem like they're about the same topic, but there tends to be a moment of complacency where you're just going with the way things are, a moment of kind of like realization and shock, and then some kind of moment of transition or change. And using that model, which I always found fascinating, I learned about it for the first time when I was in graduate school in a sociology class, and I, always been fascinated by storytelling, and how humans go about socially constructing their worlds through stories. When I realized, whoa, this person talked about a kind of template that's, for lack of a better word, is almost universal. I may not go that far, but it's fairly global in some ways. I have always found it useful to kind of like make sense out of things that involve struggle and beauty, things that coexist, because multiple realities can coexist at once. And in essence, anti-racism is ugly and beautiful at the same time. It's ugly because of why we need it, why we do the things that we do because of the things that we're challenging, but it's also beautiful in the sense that it's a liberatory experience. America, that thinks we're all about freedom, we don't often see the fact that buying into these dominant ideologies, they are like chains that we've imposed on ourselves. How free are you in a society where you might not even be able to afford your own home, despite how many jobs you work? How free are you in this country when we're only 5% of the population, but we have 25% of the world's incarcerated? So again, this idea of freedom, at least the way it comes out in the US, is in many ways a myth. And so being able to get out of that stasis, to get out of accepting the status quo, is painful. And sometimes it requires something external, something shocking. Well, in our paper, we allude to the murder of George Floyd as an example of the uprisings that you saw in 2020. And you saw how the system responded to that. And who wants to deal with that? I would rather go back to stasis. It's comfortable, is what I've always known. And I think that's the issue, is as soon as you become aware of certain things to a certain point, it starts to get personal and you don't want to go there. And so the process of becoming anti-racist, developing an anti-racist identity, which is really what we're talking about in that paper, it's not just your race consciousness, which is more cognitive, but then your sense of identity, which includes your cognitions, but also your attitudes, your feelings that get activated in certain situations, your orientation towards the world, and how you make sense out of the social world, how you socially construct your reality. You begin to construct a different reality. And social construction has kinetic consequences. It reminds me of the Thomas theorem in sociology. Again, I might be butchering the quote, but it's more or less like that which we believe to be real, regardless of its reality, becomes true in its consequences. Race is not a real thing in the physical, biological sense, but it is a social construct that has kinetic consequences. And you see it in the legal system, you see it in mortality rates, you see it in incarceration rates, et cetera. All of the things that we kind of have been alluding to. And so to put yourself in that milieu, it's painful, it's discomforting to then ask the question, how have I contributed to this? That's facing the shadow self. That's, I would argue, the darkest part of this journey. But like the hero's journey implies, you have to go through these trials and tribulations in order to emerge as a transformed being that can then do something in the society. So that reconstruction, which is the self-transformation, but then praxis, which is going out and helping other people take that journey that you took, because you can't do this work alone.
That sounds incredibly painful and incredibly hard.
And beautiful too, I think.
Mm-hmm. And best done in community, because you can have your own ideas and not be checking them, and you could be very off base. So it's really important to do this with community, and it's better to do it with community.
So you're not feeling alone, because I can see how that could be very isolating if your identity of self, your definition of who you are, and we always we project on our loved ones and the people in our community that they are certain ways. And we're always surprised. It turns out that he was Ted Bundy. But he was such a nice guy, you know? He was so good.
I'm learning nowadays, like, oh my God, you're an apartheid Nazi. I didn't realize that.
But you see, so it's very hard, because if you do it by yourself, I could see you being very alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Isolated, depressed.
Yes. And in the hero's journey, the protagonist has a mentor that guides him or her through the process. And in the process, they meet allies as well as foes, because all of this is happening. And to me, sometimes it is sad. It takes away my naive look at the world, where when it comes down to it, in the end, we're all humans and we can love each other, right? There's some dark realities I think we need to accept. And again, I do use some harsh language sometimes, and that is that there are people in power that are individually and systematically homicidal. That's just the way it is. To throw a political party under the bus is mainly the Republicans, but the Democrats aren't that different either. Mm-hmm. You may not be personally killing someone with your own hands, but you're killing entire communities with your policy. Look at what the Supreme Court has done with regards to reproductive rights. It's the first time in U.S. history that the court took away a right that someone already had. For the most part, the court has been trying to give you rights that you were fighting for. Women, our student body here, who identify as women, have less rights than their mom and grandmother had. And that policy we already have seen has had horrible consequences. Women have gone septic, and some have died. This is just an example of the many, many ways that racism seeps into all of our systems. But it also begins with education, I think. Someone taught those justices how to be the way they are. They were taught to be hateful. They were taught to be discriminating, and at the same time, look at themselves as angels.
They're better. They're the intellectual elite they tend to rail against when you think about it, because they know better.
They should.
Because they think they know better, though.
They do.
I keep thinking of when you talk about Supreme Court decision, and the Supreme Court upheld Oregon's law about homeless encampments, and I'm always stuck with, if I can't camp and I'm homeless, where the hell do I?
Prison, jail.
Where do I go?
You go to jail.
Yeah.
But you don't want them to, and you have to then commit a crime to go to jail.
And being homeless is a crime now in some places.
Yeah, but it's a vicious circle.
Yes.
Yes.
But I'm not going to provide you mental health care. I'm not going to provide you with the basics so that you can, when you leave jail, that you can no longer be homeless. I'm just sending you back on the street to be homeless.
Yeah.
It just tells you how many cognitive gymnastics we have to do to keep things in place. And I love Eduardo Bonilla Silva's book, and how we justify all of this with, a sense of, well, those are people who just can't make it in society, and we'll erase them, and they're uncomfortable, and this is my comfort zone. I'm going to minimize race. I'm going to minimize context. And we are constantly doing mental gymnastics to justify the system as it is, or are in action in it. And I think a big part of what I've been talking about today in deconstruction is to call ourselves on that justification. Why am I not stopping? Why am I? And just imagine the incredible amount of justification it must take to be a homicidal leader, to be someone who, I'm not personally killing someone, but my decisions,
My actions
have killed 20 people today, but I'm still going to go golf and have dinner because I'm in my comfort zone. That dissociation should not be allowed. There's people screaming all over the world saying, stop it, but
And there's social psychological research that talks about why it is difficult to overcome, this tendency towards justifying the system. The work of John Jost, who came up with system justification theory, does a great job of explaining how people who are both in the dominant and subordinate status in their society, they both uphold the system, but for qualitatively different reasons that you can actually quantify. And again, this might be kind of simplifying it, but it helps kind of demonstrate the point that if you're in the dominant group, you have three things operating in your favor. You have what's called an ego justification. Who am I? Who is the true me? You have a group justification. It could be ethnic or religious. Cultural. Where does my group stand? Where do I come from? And then there's the system itself, the macro society that's made for the dominant group, favors the dominant group by design. So imagine that you're in that dominant group, your sense of who you are, your ego justification, your sense of how favorable your group is, your group justification, and your sense that your society is fair, your system justification, they're all in alignment, saying, hey, look at me. I work hard. I succeeded. Other people in my group succeed. So I guess we're all hard workers. So why are we going to change the system? It's working just the way it should. If you are in the subordinate position, you don't have that. You don't have that alignment. You have a conflict between your ego, group, and system justification because you want to identify individually as something positive and favorable. You most likely came from a group, again, ethnic or religious, even though it's minoritized, that group gave you beautiful experiences growing up. It gave you your first sense of self. But you also realize that you're in a society that says that you don't belong or that you don't want to belong to. What do you do with that? You are going to engage in another type of cognitive dissonance to rationalize that disparity between those three types of justification. And it'll manifest in predictable ways. You're going to kind of look at the dominant group in a way that something you want to aspire to. And you have a tendency to look at your group and say, yeah, our group kind of does have some deficits that we need to work on. It's in many ways the groundwork for assimilationism. And we're trying to argue as anti-racists that assimilationism is part of the problem. Assimilationism is not only removing minorities from their true sense of self, it's actually, again, removing white people from their true sense of self. Because now they're identifying with their skin color, they're identifying with a category rather than their own humanity.
Thank you, Dr. Saetermoe and Dr. Vargas, for this really fascinating discussion on anti-racism. And I thank all of you for joining us for this episode of Diving into the Discourse.